Okay, thank you very much, Philip. Today's sermon is God's vision for man. And it's about how can we experience God. Some thoughts about that? Oops. So, I'm going to start with reading an excerpt from Father's words. On home church, actually. Home church is where we create a base for the love of God. All human beings can come together in this ground. We have talked about the true parents, their heart, God's heart, but you don't really know them until you do the home church. An early Korean member came and told me that the Korean members are all dispersed in different regions, doing home church. It almost seems as if the church disappeared and became inactive. But this is wrong concept. Unless we have individual perfection in the area of home church, how can we talk about the perfection of the whole? We must start with individual perfection. Without going through the home church providence, you cannot link yourself with me. We have been talking today about very deep theological, philosophical ideas, but of you just do home church, you will know what I mean. So home church is Father's way to address a big fundamental issue, which I regard as a big issue, and that's the relation between religion and politics. It's about the relationship between the world and God's world. God's world, God's hope, God's vision, and the reality. This has been throughout the Western history particularly, a very contagious conflict. And that is part of, when we look at society, has been always very much contagious. We wonder politics is about solving issues, and religion is about personal issues. And many people feel nowadays then that religion should be separate from politics. They have felt like this very, very long time. And there's good reason for that. If you look at Swedish history, it's a good example of it. This year, Sweden, we celebrate 500 years ago since the King Gustav Vasa was inaugurated king in 1523. And he is the very pivotal person for the Swedish society, establishing the Swedish nation. So for those who are not Swedish, who are here now, newcomers to Sweden, you will know that we can compare maybe Gustav Vasa to George Washington of the United States. So he's very pivotal, establishing a national state. But it's something very interesting also happened. Not only he strengthened Swedish independence and Swedish nationalism, but also through him it came a new big movement. And at that time, of course, Sweden was a Catholic nation, and he would force, the government decided basically that now we should all not be Catholic anymore, but we should become Protestants. There was two events deciding this way. So that meant actually that the government outlawed Catholicism in Sweden. It was forbidden to be Catholic. And the church became evangelical Lutheran. And this had big consequences. Even in the principle, this King Gustav Adolf, the second Adolf, is mentioned as something quite significant person, actually. Sweden became a big empire, and we had this 30-year war in Europe between the Lutheran side, the Protestant side, and the Catholic side. It was very much an issue, of course, based on political interest, but they used religion in this way. And of course, ideas later on evolved into the idea of what is the relation between government and religion, and ultimately came into philosophical ideas about state and church. And one of those who made a reflection about this was a Swedish Archbishop, Nathan Söderblom. And he wanted to bring all religions together. So he had a big meeting in Sweden, ecumenical conference in 1925. The idea was actually we need to bridge the gaps between different religions, at least within the Christian context. That was his idea. The Catholics didn't want to come, but many other groups came. And for this recognition that recognizing the importance of bringing religions together as a way of peace, he was recognized as was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1930. But then there was this other conflict between an ideological conflict that had come out in Sweden, and that is where people started realizing that, well, if religion should define what is actually true and what is good, it has to be true, right? I mean, if we should base our society or our values on something which is supposed to be absolute, it has to be derived from something. But actually, does values exist? Does something metaphysical really exist? And Axel Hegerström was a philosopher in Swedish society, and he basically had a strong influence because his view was actually that there is nothing metaphysical to life. All what exists in life is just this physical reality. And his influence was marginal, but then came a philosopher, Ingmar Hedenius, and he had this great influence in Swedish society, which all my generation and older Swedish people would know. He basically said that religion, he wrote a famous book, Belief and Knowledge. He said that actually all religious beliefs is based on superstition. So you can imagine, like Sweden went maybe like in 100 years' time and in less than 50 years' time from a society which was very strongly centered on church. Religion was a very central part of our society institutions. Today, I think all young people growing up in Sweden feels religion has no place in our society anymore. And it's very much thanks to these two people. They themselves basically redefined what was Sweden and the idea. In one sense, we can say that they were forerunners of what's going on today in the Western world. Because actually when I grew up in the 70s, most countries in the Western world would consider themselves Christian. And Sweden was known as the country which has early on rejected Christianity. But today I don't think there's any difference between Sweden or England or America. There are enclaves or communities who think differently, but basically the government, the global policies in the world is conducted in a vacuum where religion has no public meaning. And now we can think about issues like peace and conflicts, where this comes about. And of course it's a conflict between the private and the public. And this conflict always comes from self-centeredness. Like I myself, my interest, I'm not feel connected with the public. I just live for myself, basically. And that's why we have tensions and conflict in a personal life, in a social life. And we can see it also today in Sweden today. Sweden was used to known as like an external paradise. Again, for your guests coming into Sweden here. Sweden, when I grew up, Sweden was proud of itself. We are the welfare society. We created a harmonious society for everybody. But today, we have a lot of tensions, even in Sweden. And of course, they exist in many other places in the world as well. But the concepts are the same, that how do we create peaceful relationships, engagement between our private and public. So we have to find something mutual, a mutual interest, exploring what we have in common. And it's also very much reflection of what Father used to talk about, is the relation between the mind and the body. And that's why he says we need religion. And it's always like when we can unite our mind and body, then we can have a harmonious relationship between the personal, the private, and the public. And that's also generally also what culture is about. It's our social relationship. Culture is not just something we listen to or see or is objective. It's something we're engaging ourselves in. That's the important value of culture. It's the traditions, the fellowship, and that's how we feel joy and meaningful in life. So culture is important, and the challenge is, and this is of course in a very direct way identified by public institutions as such. UNESCO was created in 1945 as an institution to promote culture. And it's connected also with the issues of peace. So we see that United Nations try to have these proclamations of human rights and peace in the year 2000, the year 2001 to 2010. They proclaimed, for instance, the decade of culture for peace and nonviolence for children of the world. But did it work? Did this declaration work? No, they didn't work, right? We still have a lot of ideas. It's nice we have these declarations. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just reflecting on the point that when they make this big conclusion, they come into the meeting, how do you really make it work? So we can maybe reflect about what is the essence of culture. It reflects on issues of what it means to be human, what it means to be a human being, environment, what is the environment, and peace and health. If you think about it, actually, it is what Father referred to, actually. It is also not only religious issues, there are philosophical issues. Because what do we mean when we talk about human being? This is what Father tried to address in his words with Home Church, for instance. It is actually that we are not just physical beings, we are also spiritual beings. When we talk about environment, we're not just talking about external environment, but the flowers and the trees, the mountains. Yes, all that's important. But we also think about the environment in the sense of culture, in the sense of what we're creating ourselves, how we feel each other, how we treat each other. What kind of culture, what does culture do with us, how it affects us. And of course, peace is not just about it's quiet and everybody agree, because that can lead to oppression. Peace is something else that can be engaged with us from within in ourselves. And health, I thought very much about this when people talked about the COVID crisis, right? Everything locked down, we think about the health, but it's also very in a biological, physical sense where people emphasize health. But they think about also the mental health, the other inner side of ourselves. Health is also a relationship. Do we need to go to school or not? Do we need to meet anyway? How do we treat one each other? It's just not something external, physical, it's something internal. And this inability to recognize the internal aspects is what I try to focus people's minds on, because I realize people tend always, when they look at religion or society, human nature, we always tend to focus on external parts. But then we're missing the big picture. How do we get the big picture? And this is what I would like to call the existential model. This picture is not seen so well. Anyway, you see here, what I mean is coming from, I mentioned this before, is this theory of communication. They have science have explored and discovered, in 1978 there was Iranian scientists who understood how do we communicate with one another. Okay, we think about communication through words, right? But it's actually, also realize actually, you don't only hear my words, but actually how you understand it is the tone of my voice. And ultimately, it's through body language. So he came out to a figure about 7-10% is actually the words of communication. And the other one is another 30%, 27-30% different varies is actually the tone of the voice. But body language, interestingly, he determined was actually, through experience, through research, realized it's the biggest part, it's like 60%, between 50 and 60%. And I realized that it dawned on me that I got this inspiration, really, that actually this reflects about how we see things, how things are, actually. There's 10%, of course, is the physical reality. It corresponds to that, something concrete, tangible, we always look at. The other one is the mental reality. It's our thoughts and feelings, or my thoughts and ideas, which are projected in things. And they're projected in everything. In culture, obviously, it's thoughts and ideas are projected in things. But behind those thoughts, there is also feelings, emotions. And that's, of course, connected with our spiritual sense of reality. I would say that that internal spiritual sense of reality is actually the biggest part of our reality. So when we have this conflict, is we focus on too small part instead of looking at the bigger picture, which is our thoughts and ideas. And of course, this is, so when we talk about religions, conflicts between people, is of course that we see differences. And then we wonder, those differences, this is not like me, they're wrong. We separate ourselves from them. And of course, in the religious doctrine, this is very common. I have the true religion. I feel God works through this religion. And probably when you feel that way, it's probably true. It's true for you. But someone else have a different religion, a different concept. How can that be true? I used to think that way also, actually. I mean, if I feel God's working through this religion, how can God work through some other religion? He's be on this side. But that actually then is somehow missing the bigger point. Because behind those doctrines, institutions, there are some thoughts and ideas. And these thoughts and ideas is not just about the rituals and the policies of each religion. They are a reflection, if you look deeply enough, about something deeper and more fundamental about human life. That's why religion is not just about doctrines and institutions. It's about the way we live, how life works. It's because if you understand then that life is something more than the physical, it's something spiritual, which affects us even in our daily lives here. But of course, for all eternity. So when we die, all religion teaches about that, right? It's that to die is not the end. It's a part of a continuing journey. How do I make that journey relevant for me today is about understanding that actually I'm part of a long journey to explore and learn things. And that each one of us do the same thing. And that's, of course, very different from a materialistic point of view. So I think this is what the Father wants to teach us, actually, there's a meaning of home church. It's not of course, I can say my home is like a church also, where I meet God and where I can feel secure. So I don't want to go somewhere else. Here's my church. When I leave my home, I leave the church. It's not really that, right? It is something more. It's like I'm engaged with the community, and I want to find something in common we have with other people. And I really feel, I'm sure all of you have this experience while you're meeting other people, if you have this kind of mindset. And so part of this presentation was the way I did this. So we saw Cancer meeting Pramati Mbunti, right? So he organized this World Peace Award conference. So then there are many Buddhists there. He invites people from all the different types of religion coming there. So based on my own religion, when I understand Father's words of home church, it's how to understand the essence of what it means to be human. Well, how do we really create a culture of peace? How do we create something which can be inclusive, but still we don't reject what's essential about the sacredness of life, of God's intention of life? It can bring that in. I can communicate with these people in a very kind of personal and a genuine way. It's not just artificial. I say, okay, I try to be nice and polite and correct. It's something I need to explore that I can find we have something deep in common. That's actually where I can meet God, where I can feel God. And I think it's mutual. So that's why, when I meet these monks, I can feel they get to know me, and I can get to know them, and I can feel, I don't have to be a Buddhist, but I can still have that mutual respect. I can meet a Muslim, I can meet a Sikh, I can find something in common with them, which is fundamental human. And the interesting thing is I can find something more genuine in common with them than, for instance, my old friends. Because we share something who are ethnically, socially, we have something in common growing up, but they haven't really got to the point of what is the essence of life. Because the essence of life is something more than the external. And it's something more than we can conceptualize always. So if we look at all different types of religion, I would say, and that of course is when Father talks about home churches in a small scale, but also it is part of the bigger scale. It's like how we all different peoples can connect with one another and understand what we have in common. And through this way, when we're serving other people, centered on something common, we will feel God's presence being there. And that's, I think, that how we can also affect and make this world, not only our communities more peaceful, our own lives more peaceful, but ultimately the world more peaceful. So that's what it says Father Moon's also vision. That's why home church is for maybe for everyone at all times. Okay,